the hour, so thank you all so much for joining today. We are excited to have you here. And I'd like to introduce Preston Trabas, who will be talking about board games, a hobby we both share, and how he uses them with students in the classroom. Now, before he gets started, I do want to do a quick pitch for our Ready, Set, STEM event. If you haven't heard about this yet, we're just starting to let people know, but we are doing a big event on November 1st instead of our regular STEM Wednesday, so 2 weeks, I think it is. And on November 1st, we're going to have a whole bunch of guest speakers, multiple sessions, all sorts of great things. Preston just dropped the link in the chat. So we hope you go register for that, share it out with your friends, as it's going to be a really amazing event. All right, I'm going to go off camera, Preston. You can take it away.
Sounds great. Welcome, everybody. What I'd love to do in the chat, as we always do to start our STEM Wednesdays, is if you just want to drop a quick comment where you are joining us from. We got different time zones. We got Ohio. Be sure to also change your chat to everyone so that everyone can see, of course, the Colorado, Arizona, DC, California. We're getting all sorts of folks joining us from Vancouver Island, Canada. Howdy from Texas, a few folks from Texas. I am located in Texas myself, so good to see you. Houston, Canada. Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm going to go back to my first slide just so you can see what our topic is today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our topic for today's STEM Wednesday, happy Wednesday, everybody. You've made it halfway through the week. Revolutionizing board games with 3D printing. And then more specifically, how we can craft custom components for unforgettable gameplay. Hopefully, if you're joining us today, you either have access to a 3D printer or have been interested in the world of 3D printing. That will be the main product that is used to leverage classroom engagement, excitement, specifically with board games. As Hannah mentioned, I am a board game enthusiast. If you saw my promo video, there's way too many board games to even play, but I just love board games. To give you a brief overview of our schedule today, our time does go by fast on these, so I want to just get through our quick agenda. We'll first talk about components. What are components? How can you use a 3D printer to print components? And then how can you go to the next step by actually designing components or having students design? And if you're not familiar, one of my favorite words of components, meeples, are the little character human or humanoid-like figures that are often seen in board games. And then finally, the most exciting part is getting to game design. So helping students along that process of game design. And if you attended one of our STEM Wednesdays about the engineering, the design process, you're going to see a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels. So I'm glad you're here with us today, and it should be a fun one. To start off, audience question here. So rather than doing a poll, this is an open-ended question. I'd love to see some discussion in the chat here. And the first question is, what are some of your favorite board games? These could be board games from your childhood. These could be board games from today. I will forgive anybody for saying Monopoly. It is my least favorite game of all time, but it's going to be okay. Oh, we have D&D, one of my favorites. We're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons today, so love to see the D&D representation. Ticket to Ride, great one. Ticket to Ride has a lot of variations as well. The European one with the tunnels is great. Clue, classic Clue. Clue, I feel like, is another one where we've seen a lot of variations of Clue. We see I read the word sorry. I thought you were apologizing. Yes, the board games. I know sorry is not a boring answer. Sorry is a very cutthroat, one of those first games where I feel like sibling rivalry is often formed in the fires of sorry. Stone Age, great worker placement, of course. Wingspan, Mousetrap. Oh, blast from the past. Mouse. I can never get the thing on Mousetrap to actually work. Trouble. Pam says Trouble. I'll have to share a story another time of how my grandma cheated when I was playing Trouble, and but that's a story for another day. Then, of course, the Game of Life. Great board game. So love seeing all of that. And for those of you who are Seven Wonders, great game as well. Great, great, great. Thank you, everybody, for that participation. And as you're thinking about these games, I want you to start thinking about why you enjoy these games. Why are they some of your favorites? Is it the play style? Is it the board itself? I'm a big fan of very heavy components. I like things that have a heft to them. And so be thinking about that as well as lessons to be learned while playing board games. So let's start with why board games. And I want to start with a story from when I was teaching in the classroom. When I was teaching the classroom, I was an elementary educator and I taught everything from second up to sixth. And I would always start the year by having a board game day. And what I noticed was, students would bring very, very typical board games, and it was pretty fun. And then 2020 happened, the pandemic happened, and then I started teaching online. My first year back, yay, board game day. It's one of my favorite days. It's one of the students' favorite days. And then it was the biggest disaster that I had seen since being back in the classroom. Students were stealing things, they weren't cleaning up, they were arguing, they would start a game and then they would run off. And I won't get into the details of why I think that is, but the reality was our first board game day after the pandemic, after students had been home for so long and hadn't had time to interact with other students, it was a complete disaster. And when I talked with our team, we were talking about, well, did they kind of lose that privilege? Where do we go from here? And we shifted our mindset into no, no, no. This is something that is very important. Let's use this as a tool to help our students learn social emotional skills, help them learn taking turns, all of the things that really teachers want with their classroom management. And so what we ended up doing was we would introduce one board game a week and we would talk about the game and we would then let students play in groups and then we would have discussions about how to play these games. And what we were doing is we were building up to our big board game day. And when that day finally arrived, it was night and day. The students that I saw playing together, taking turns, congratulating each other when other students won, students that normally weren't interacting together were playing games with each other. And a big thing that came out of that was students really got into chess. They started playing a lot of chess. They built their own little bracket for a tournament, and it actually ended up kickstarting a chess club on our campus because there were so many students that were interested. A lot of them also wanted to play me. A few of them did beat me, but it was incredible. And I have to tell you, the difference in my classroom community after that day, because we played board games all day. We did no curriculum, we did no instruction, we played board games all day. And some might say that was a waste. I would argue the exact opposite because everything after that point, students that normally weren't cleaning up in the classroom were cleaning up because they had that practice with board games. Students that would usually whine and complain when things didn't go their way, I was finding them complimenting and letting other people have turns and go first. It was a complete shift in my classroom, and I absolutely attribute it to board games. On a more academic side of it, if we take a look at Bloom's taxonomy, we can see higher orders of thinking that can really start to happen when you use board games in your classroom. So if you just start to play board games, we can see starting in that understanding apply, moving up maybe in a little bit into the analyzing and evaluating, especially some of these games that you mentioned, like Clue, absolutely. But where the real magic happens is when you invite students to create their own board games. And you're getting into that highest order of thinking where students are producing their own board games. They're tapping into their creativity. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So let's talk components. I've included a few images here of components. Components are any sort of piece or thing that is included in a board game that allows you to play the game. So for example, if you're playing Monopoly, I know I said Monopoly is not my favorite game, but of course I'm going to use it for an example. Monopoly, those little hotels that you put, those are components. Dice can be simple components. Now, a lot of board games that, for those of you that have played, and a lot of newer board games, there's a lot of pieces. And so one of the things that I love to use my 3D printer for is for organization of my pieces, of my components. So if you look at one of the images here, you can see that an organizing box was designed to keep track of all the pieces. I agree. Yes, the metal characters in Monopoly do have a nice heft to them. I do believe my brother threw one at me when I was younger. But anyways, one of the other things that I'd love to find online, if you search, you can find that other creators have enhanced board games by creating components that bring game design to the next level. So if you look at another image on the screen, there is a game called Terraforming Mars. It's a game where you're acting as humans that have gone to Mars, you're terraforming it, and it's actually really tricky to keep all the pieces in the right place. And so people have designed 3D models that allow you to organize it. It gives it a more three-dimensional feel. And it's pretty amazing to see how your gameplay actually changes. Another thing you can see on this picture is somebody from our team took the game Settlers of Catan, or Catan, however you pronounce it. And yep, and there's the in the chat right there, and printing a massive version to play in your yard. There's no reason that any school couldn't have this. If you teach students how to play Settlers of Catan, you could print these and have them play giant versions as well. If you look in the chat, I have placed links on Thingiverse to a few of my favorites and places where you can get started. So you can find dice towers that can be used to roll dice. So if you have games that already use dice, there's a lot of math games out there that use dice. Why not spice up a little bit and use your 3D printer to print fun dice towers that students can use? Board game organizers. You can actually print your own Catan game. And then if you click on the dice holders link, you can get a whole range of dice holders that are some of my favorites. And I saw in the chat somebody mentioned Dungeons and Dragons. I have more dice than I know what to do with. And so those dice holders come in handy. All right, another audience question. I would love to hear from all of you. I told you to think about this a little bit earlier. I want to hear why you like to play games. If you're going to play board games with friends or with family, or you're playing solitaire, what is usually the driving factor behind playing games? And then I'll put that question in the chat as well for you to think about. I'm going to go on to my next slide, but I definitely want you to take time, think about it. You could simply say, you're a competitive person. Okay, let's see, we got strategy. Oh, it's so fun when you get a game and you can strategize. Board games are such a fabulous way to socialize using our brain. Quality time with others, love it. Critical thinking. Some of those board games require too much critical thinking. Spending time with family and friends. Let's see, beating my sister's typical eldest sibling things. Love it. That was having flashbacks to playing with my brothers for sure. Spending time, friendly competition. Some are very silly. Those party games. If you ever play like the Jackbox party games, those are super fun. And then computational thinking. Great. Love these answers. Love these thoughts. And I want you to really think about that why as we get into students playing and students designing. So I'm going to start with Tinkercad. If you haven't used Tinkercad before, Tinkercad is a free-to-use website that allows students, teachers, and anybody really— oh, thank you, Hannah. I was about to put it in the chat. You beat me to it. Is a free-to-use website where students can do their own 3D designing. And if you have a 3D printer, this is where I really wish I had this sort of an idea when I was doing board games in my classroom. I let students create their own board games, but we went with the classic cardboard paper cutting out. But I would definitely use Tinkercad for the following things. First is I want to show you really quick how you can use Tinkercad to actually print your own custom board. I want to show you how you can use it, how students can use it to actually create their own characters, and then also those components. So I'm going to go to my Tinkercad website here. And again, if you go to Tinkercad, this isn't necessarily a deep dive in Tinkercad, but just showing if you've used Tinkercad before, or if you want to start your students to think about it, this is a great place to start. So if you're doing a Tinkercad design, you could have students start with a board. And if you want to go nice and simple, boom, we now have a board. And you can then start adding in other squares for kind of imagine, like I always think I'm having flashbacks to all of the times I've played Candyland with my children recently, and we definitely have got new games since then. But when I think about a Candyland board, I think of these squares that allow you to move around the board. So I would show my students how you could essentially copy and paste squares to create a board that then they could use for play. Now, something to keep in mind that students often think is they will spend a lot of time changing the color. And if you are printing one solid piece, it will simply be the color of your filament. So I know there might be some who have experience in the chat of using Sharpies or markers or paint. So if you do have some suggestions, definitely let us know in the chat. But the second thing I want to show you on Tinkercad with a warning, my warning is when you show your students this, be ready for them to spend the entire time messing around with this feature. On the right-hand side, under basic shapes, you can change from basic shapes to creatures and characters. And when you click on more shapes, you get a wide range of shapes and animals and creatures that you could have students put into their game that allow them to be the maneuvering pieces in their board games. Hannah was saying you can follow along with their built-in tutorials that they have challenges, but we also have challenges in My STEM Kit. So if you go to mystemkits.com, you can check out and sign up for a free trial to also see how learning the basics in Tinkercad 2 can expand into more complex type of usage with Tinkercad. The other thing I want to show really quick, this is the nerdy D&D, Dungeons and Dragons side of me. I love Dungeons and Dragons, and this was a website that I used that got my students writing more than I've ever seen them write before. And we were going to talk about how to play Dungeons and Dragons, but they had to create a character. And on this website, Hero Forge, you can customize pretty much everything on your character. So if you wanted to make a half orc, you can click on a half orc, and then you can change literally everything from what their face looks like to the clothing that they're wearing. And what I encouraged my students to do was they had to create a character and then create an in-depth background for their character. And I had students writing pages upon pages upon pages, getting into these characters. And what's really cool about Hero Forge, if you're into this sort of a thing, is if you use Hero Forge, you can actually purchase the 3D model that you design that you could then print on a 3D printer. So Hero Forge is another great resource to get students excited, especially if you're getting into more of a tabletop role-playing game. All right, moving forward, we just have a little bit of time left. And I do have another audience question for you all. My next question, I'd love to hear your thoughts on. What benefits could you see by letting students create their own board games? So imagine you've talked about board games, they understand how to make board games, and now they have project-based time to create their own board games with their friends or in assigned groups. What benefits do you see in doing that? Okay, got a couple thoughts here. We have project management. Yeah, a very popular career choice right now, project management. And what a great place for students to start with project management, looking at that big picture, but small details. We have another comment to go with the subjects to use as review. Yes, stories that they read. Love that. Trial and error through playtesting. Absolutely. That engineering mindset for sure. A way to review concepts, creativity, teamwork, collaboration. And then I love that one. It's they would love them and they would take care of them. And that goes on with another comment that says they have ownership of their learning. Another comment, their kids love Forbidden Island. Oh, see, that's another thing we could highlight too is not all board games are competitions to beat other people, but it is a cooperative game that you have to work together to succeed. Very interdisciplinary to show their learning, classroom community, art and math, content review, writing, so many great benefits. I love it. I could just let you all talk for the rest of the time here. And I want to finish by giving you a very detailed breakdown of how I would recommend you start this if you are a classroom teacher and you have a 3D printer. So the first thing, the most important is if you want to get into game design, is play. The next important thing is play. And the third most important thing is play. And I would encourage you to allow time for students to play board games, to play games that have already been created, because there is one of my favorite quotes by Mr. Rogers that says, play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood. I play Mario Kart with my daughter, and her competition, her level of seriousness is sometimes a little scary. But when kids are playing, they get serious. And it allows students that otherwise start to tune out, or they may not be as engaged in the academic content. As soon as it is turned into a game, they feel like they can participate and they can succeed. So do not underestimate play, especially because the next step I would say in game design is after your students have played a lot of games, it can even be video games, you get into class discussion. What I would do with my students is I would pull up a working document where students would discuss in groups, and we would come together as a class and we would talk about what is a board game? What are rules? How do we design this? And it was really cool, similar to one of the comments that was about project management, is you get the big picture, but you're allowing students to be co-collaborators in this process. It's not just you telling them how to do it. So I would definitely start with a class discussion, creating a working document that students can refer back to when they are then given that time for their own game design. And I will finish with this step-by-step, pretty general. There's a lot of ideas out there that you can find, but here is where I would start with. First is I would have your class decide on a theme or a topic. If you simply want them to create a game, they can choose topics that are interesting to them. If they want to create a game that's about Pokemon or about Fortnite, things like that, they could totally do that. Or assigning them a topic. When I taught sixth grade, we had finished up our unit on decimals, and we had to review adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing decimals. 4 major standards in sixth grade that are very complex. And my board game parameters were, your board game must include 5 review questions for each topic: 5 addition, 5 subtraction, 5 multiplication, and 5 division. And think about what students are doing in that process. They're having to create the questions, they're having to check their answers to make sure that it's correct in the board game, and they're having to review the concepts. So those parameters really allow students to review the concepts as they're creating the games. The second step for students would be to create the rules. Everything from what is the objective of the game, how many players are involved, how do you start and end the game, how do you start and end a turn, as well as what components are needed. The next one is where it gets really fun, and you definitely have to have students put in the work on steps 1 or 2, because once they get to step 3, this is where it gets really fun. Sketching out their ideas and blueprints, whether they're doing 3D design or if you're doing any sort of hybrid style. If you're bringing in cardboard, bringing in paper, bringing in paint along with 3D design, this is where it gets really fun for students, as well as, like I said, that 3D design with your printer. And then, of course, once they print and they put it all together, play testing it, and then redesigning to go back and to make it better. Because when they get to play other students' games, they get to review the concepts, they get to learn. It's a lot of fun. So to finish off, from my own personal experience, what I've observed from using board games in my classroom, it builds classroom community. The students that didn't play with each other before are playing with each other. They're supporting each other. They're learning how to lose. They're congratulating one another. It is a total shift in mindset. Logic and reasoning. The way that students develop their logic and reasoning within board games, you will see how that turns into beneficial skills in things like science, being able to support their ideas using evidence. And then if you're learning any skills within your classroom, this is a low stakes environment to practice those skills. If you're a first grade teacher and you are having a hard time with your students taking turns, games are a great way for them to practice those skills. So I would love for you all to start today. And if you could, in the chat, my last question for you is, how do you want to start using 3D printing or board games in general in the future? Do you want to use Tinkercad to have students design things? Do you want to just start playing board games? Do you want to look for organization components online to help your games that you already have look and play better? I'd love to hear that as we wrap this up. And I really, this is, as you can tell, it's a topic I'm very passionate about. And it's something that I really miss from being a classroom teacher. I would do Dungeons and Dragons all the time with my students. And again, the way that you can see games transform your classroom, there's nothing else like it. And when you have a 3D printer, whatever your students can create on a 3D designing software, you can bring it to life. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you want to join us next week, our next Learning Lab, Hannah is going to hit the trails as she shows us how to integrate STEM technology with hiking. Now, Hannah, you're here. Do folks need to like go outside and hiking, or can we join from the comfort of our desks here?
You all can join from the comfort of your desks. I will be on a trail. I've done a test to make sure I get good signal.
Oh,
on
no way.
trails. But yeah, I'll be out on the trails and you all can be at your computers. That way you make sure you have good internet. And I'll be showing different things out as I wander around one of my favorite local hiking places.
Oh, that's going to be great. Well, I'll see you next week, Hannah. And thank you again, everybody, for participating in the chat. And hope to see you next time. And then don't forget, we also have our STEM event. I'll put that link one more time for those that want to register in 2 weeks. Thanks again, everybody. And happy Wednesday. You made it through half of the weekend.
For anyone still here, if you didn't see in the chat, I did drop a link to favorite accurate science board games. There are so many cool ones out there that talk about evolution, like Terraforming Mars came up. That is so scientifically accurate. So there's loads of these for all sorts of different grade levels if you're looking to tie it back with subjects you already teach. So that is in the chat for you there.